Hi, Dan Goodstein here. I'm back for part two of our executive interview series on dispelling the hype around RPA with automation veteran Shail Khiyara. Today, we're talking about what happens to RPA in a post-COVID world. Shail, good to have you back.
Yeah, it's great to be back. How are you doing in New York?
Doing great, doing great. Things are starting to get back to some semblance of normal, and the weather's nice, so that's all good.
That's good. Excellent.
So listen, last time, I want to recap a little bit from our last conversation before we jump in. Last time we spoke mostly about the hype around RPA, the state of the industry, and you said a couple interesting things. So I think you said that RPA is a blunt instrument, that 85% of the customer base out there is still having less than 10 robots and struggling with scale, and that RPA is only one piece of the automation stack. Does that sound right? Anything else you'd want to add to level set or anything you want to retract?
No, I think that's a good summary of what we talked about. We also talked about some of the acquisitions that have occurred in this market over the last couple of years. Since we spoke last time, there's been another acquisition in this market with Microsoft. So there's some dynamic movement in the market. There are some pricing pressures as well, which we talked about the last time.
Yeah, yeah, I want to ask you about that. But so let's start kind of at the top. What do you think? You've been in this space a long time. What do you think? What does RPA look like in a post-COVID world? There's a lot of talk about this maybe accelerating enterprise automation and digital transformation, but there's a lot of nervous people out there. So how do you think operations are affected? How do you think workforces are affected? Give us your perspective.
You're right. I mean, I think it's a very difficult time for everyone in the market, and there's a lot of focus around efficiency and, more importantly, resiliency in the market. I think the RPA spending will continue to grow, particularly with the pandemic situation. There is a strong desire to operate more efficiently
Yeah.
within many organizations. However, I don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that the pandemic will magically accelerate RPA demand, which we keep hearing a lot
Yeah.
about from the vendor community. You've seen a lot of postings on that as well.
Yep.
And the reason I don't buy into it is because there's a significant amount of labor and unemployed labor that is already there and will be available for hire. That's one aspect of it. The second is that you will need people to manage automation. This is not a autopilot situation. I think often we don't realize that automation efforts within an organization are not on autopilot, and particularly in the case of attended automation. And in most instances, you do require a human in the loop, people to manage your bots, to be able to keep them running efficiently. You need a COE, you need developers, you need process experts to manage the automation. I think automation brings efficiency. It does not bring resiliency. Let me repeat that. In its current state, automation brings a lot of efficiency to organizations. It does not necessarily drive resiliency for organization. When bots break, and they do, you need a human to intervene. When a bad process is automated, you need a human to intervene. When you upgrade to the next version, you need humans involved. So, and when you stitch together a set of non-integrated technologies, I would say, like process mining, AI, RPA, cognitive analytics, you need humans involved. So the third aspect that doesn't necessarily contribute to the hype in demand post pandemic is that customers will be very cautious about investing in automation technologies. I'm not saying that they will not invest. I'm saying that they will be cautious from the perspective of wanting to see a clear, distinct ROI commensurate to the pricing that exists in the market. The average pricing for a bot is anywhere between $1,500 to $4,000, depending on which bot you're buying. Plus, you have a 5 to 7x attach rate on services. Plus, you need to have a center of excellence to manage those bots, which requires you to hire certain developers to manage this automation process. And the total cost of ownership will become the question going forward in the purchase of automation, and particularly in a market that is focused on efficiency.
So stay there a second, Shail. So that all makes complete sense. But with things being so siloed and disparate, how do you measure the success of automation? How do you prove out the ROI?
Yeah, so I think today, if you look at the metrics in the market, there are a lot of derivative metrics in the market, right? Automation and RPA particularly started with FTE reduction. For the first, probably, I would say probably about 2 years ago, the conversations were around FTE. They have morphed and moved more towards what I call derivative metrics. We did this, we deployed this bot, which did that, and hence it created customer efficiency in our organizations. That's what I mean by derivative metrics, not necessarily direct metrics in the market. So I think the conversations that are going on now are also about capacity creation in the market. You know, we deployed automation, so we have 100,000 hours more to do something in the organization. And the challenge with those derivative metrics lies with the fact that they're very difficult to prove. You can't go to a CFO and say, you know, I've automated 30% of Sally's time, so I need to go let go 30% of Sally. That doesn't necessarily work. And so you need to tie it specifically back to business outcomes. As an example, you know, we have an accounts receivable situation, and we're going to deploy bots to reduce our collection time from X to Y. That's a derivative metric, versus being able to go in and say, we have an accounts receivable situation, we're going to be able to collect X million dollars more by deploying this particular automation, and that is going to be our actual outcome. That is missing today in the measurements that you see in automation.
So extend that a little bit further, right? So there's some news recently about RPA being used to process PPP loans through the SBA, and I guess the automation was too much for the banks to handle, so they actually barred banks from using RPA altogether. So what happened there? Is this typical? Have you seen this kind of thing before?
Not this kind of thing before. Yeah, you've certainly seen scenarios where customers have used a particular RPA vendor and moved to another RPA vendor, or used RPA to augment other automation technologies that they want to bring into the organization, but not a scenario like the SBA, which we talked about the last time, where they've actually put a stop to any loan applications coming in through robotic process automation. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have to understand the environments that we are deploying automation into. We have to make sure that, you know, we're not bombarding a legacy system, which is what happened in this case, with thousands of bots pushing applications. It's about the right expectation setting with the end customer itself. I think what is happening in the market is that a lot of the risk is borne by the customer. The risk of being able to make sure that the automation works, that it actually delivers the results that you wanted for the organization. That risk is solely borne by the customer in this ecosystem that we see today in automation. That ecosystem needs to change in order to drive scale within organizations.
So Shail, in the midst of all of this, the rumored acquisition of a couple of weeks ago has happened, as you alluded to, the Microsoft Softmotive. What's your thoughts on this, and what opportunities and threats do you see for the incumbents with all this consolidation going on?
Well, I think it's an interesting time in the RPA market. I think, you know, this is acquisition number 5 that has occurred in the market. We talked about 4 acquisitions in the past video that we did. This particular one, you know, Microsoft, and in fact, Apple as well, has always provided some level of automation within their Windows stack. You know, there are you know, the 3 major vendors in RPA that we talked about are still built on Microsoft technology. So I believe that this acquisition of Softomotive and the very fast pace at which Microsoft is innovating in RPA, this is a big moment for RPA as a whole. But I don't think the end game for Microsoft is RPA. I think the end game is a lot bigger than RPA itself. Certainly the price points are very desirable. You know, Microsoft is offering, I believe, prior to the Softomotive acquisition, they were offering solutions at $40 a month, which is about $480 a year. 1/10 the price that you see in the marketplace, which, by the way, is being heavily discounted by the vendors at the moment and in the past year as well. So you're going to see quite a bit of disruption with Microsoft's entry into the market. The dominance of Microsoft, if not in RPA, or let me put it this way, I think the dominance of Microsoft in RPA or with RPA should not be underestimated. They have a distribution capacity that is, probably 10x the size of the three large vendors combined. When I say distribution capacity, I'm talking about sales and marketing. Their progress in RPA in a very short period of time, look at the use cases that they've come out with, is worth noting. I think their ability to offer Win Automation for free, which is the Softomotive product, to all their Power Automate customers, certainly shows the financial stability of the organization, and more importantly, their ability to offer a significantly lower price point with CAC ratios, customer acquisition cost ratios, that are likely to be 1/50th of the incumbents in the marketplace. Microsoft has a huge distribution mechanism in place. But I think the play for Microsoft is a lot bigger than just RPA.
So in this post-COVID world, and with the state of RPA being what it is, the valuations of these companies, these incumbents you're talking about, what's the next wave? Where do you see the opportunities?
So I think there are a bunch of opportunities in the marketplace. I think it's important to point out, I mentioned resiliency and efficiency. Let me address that and then come back to this notion of, the opportunities that exist in the market. There are several. I think the core challenge is how RPA is marketed and sold. It is often sold and positioned with a lot of hype, a quick fix, buy 2 robots, get them running, do a POC, see an ROI very quickly, go with the business unit, create citizen developers in your organization, have a robot for everyone. It's often a Swiss Army knife sold as a toaster.
Right.
And I think that is a significant challenge. In the past, RPA was sold as FTE reduction. We talked about that. And, the metrics have morphed and changed in the market. And I think the focus needs to be more on business outcomes versus process efficiency.
Yep, great.
So then to your point about opportunities that exist in the market, I think there are several. There are disruptive opportunities around cloud-based solutions, putting the studio, the orchestrator, the runtime in the cloud itself, which significantly reduces the costs. There are companies that are doing that. There's a company called Innowise that has an InnoCloud solution out into the marketplace that cuts the total cost of ownership per process by about 50% using a cloud-based solution. Okay. I think there are opportunities for process simulation in the market. We've all heard about process mining, but how about taking the process mining capabilities and actually being able to drive competitive simulations of a process to see if we change this or that, how does that actually affect the outcome? Okay. I think there are opportunities clearly in open source RPA. There's a company called RoboCorp that's has an aim to drive the cost of the robot down to zero. Will be interesting to see how that happens or how the market takes that. So there are a bunch of opportunities out in the marketplace.
Exciting. So what's your parting advice for those who are watching this that are on the automation journey with all this disruption going on and maybe even rethinking some of their direction?
Knew you were going to ask me that. I would say,
the crystal ball question. You come back in 6 months and see if you were right.
Yeah, I've got to think through that. I would say, embrace automation and don't underestimate the culture building aspect in your organization. It's critically important. Measure your organization's automation emotion. Any emotion that does not drive a positive response to automation will impact your ability to scale. So embrace it. Don't underestimate the cultural adoption aspect. I would say, stop hyperventilating on hyperautomation. Look at the set of technologies which, when you piece them together, you derive the maximum value for your business. They may not be in the hyper A stack, however that is defined. Most importantly, I think in your negotiations, understand who is bearing the risk of integrating those technologies and the cost of maintaining them. That's critically important. I would say finally, the metrics are meaningful. Find metrics that are meaningful versus derivative metrics, and look for outcome-driven metrics. Ask your vendors to own them with you. Most importantly, really understand the total unit economics of your automation and your total cost of ownership.
Shail Khiyara, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for being here.
Dan, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.